All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm just gonna go back to my screen. Okay, so thank you all so much for joining us. I'm really grateful to you all for your attendance. This is the second event that we've had with the Future Leaders in Conservation series. So I'm really excited for the discussion we're going to have today. The topic is a biodiversity of wonder, many paths to conservation. Before we begin, I'd just like to point your attention, if you haven't heard this already, that we are operating in both English and Spanish. So you can go to the bottom of your screen and select the globe icon. There you can select either English or Spanish, whichever language you prefer. So please stay muted while we're listening to the panelists, but we will have opportunities to engage with questions at the end. As we're gathered here today to talk about conservation and our relationship with the land, with animals, and the world around us, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Land and human stewardship of land is at the heart of conservation, and we're grateful to Indigenous peoples as the original and present stewards of this land and its resources. I'm joining this event from the ancestral lands of the Wolastoqey Nation. Minocquist, or St. John, New Brunswick, where I am currently, is traditionally a meeting place of the Wolastoqey, Passamaquoddy, and Mi'kmaq, and is territory covered under peace and friendship treaties. These treaties did not surrender land and are still legally binding today. We acknowledge the colonial history and present of conservation. The goal of this panel discussion today is to broaden our perspectives on what conservation looks like. Decolonizing our perspective and our relationships with nature are important steps towards this. How can we, as future leaders, work towards a more just and equitable field of conservation and society? A helpful starting point to learn about the Indigenous peoples where you live is native-land.ca. So thank you. The Future Leaders in Conservation Initiative, which is the planning team that brought you this event today, is part of Road to Recovery. Road to Recovery is a movement that's focused on recovering the most steeply declining bird species. We integrate biological and social science across the flyway that migratory birds all occupy this whole Western Hemisphere here. And we co-produce research with conservation practitioners in order to minimize the implementation gap. By working with these partners, we hope to have our conservation solutions enacted quickly and equitably in order to work with the local communities who need our research. Road to Recovery has a desire to diversify its membership and engage the next generation of conservationists, which is where the Future Leaders in Conservation Initiative fits in. If you're interested in learning more about Road to Recovery, you can visit our website, r2ourbirds.org. The Future Leaders in Conservation series is a new initiative. We're about a year old, and this is our second event. Our broad goal is to identify how conservation organizations can support students and early career professionals. We do this by engaging you in events like this, by working together as a community to support each other as peers, and we have some longer-term goals such as a mentorship network and in-person events. So we're really excited to continue to grow this initiative. The session today, as I mentioned earlier, is called A Biodiversity of Wonder, Many Paths to Conservation. Today, we're going to be having a panel discussion that highlights some of the many ways that we can engage in conservation. We'll explore panelists' career journeys and their unique perspectives on conservation, and we'll also discuss how to stay motivated and hopeful while doing conservation work. This event would not be possible without the amazing planning team that has worked so hard to make this event come together. So I'd like to extend an immense thank you to Esmeralda Bravo, Kier Chowhin, and Elaine Metz. I'm also, by the way, I'm Quinn Carvey. I'm the current graduate fellow for Road to Recovery. We have additional planning team members. This is a large group of people that made this possible, including Missia Panita, Lauren Farr, Emily Singular, and Henny Stevens. So together, this core team has made this event possible, in addition to many other people who are a part of Road to Recovery and our broader network. So thank you so much to everyone who contributed today. Today's agenda will, after the conclusion of these opening remarks, I will turn it over to Emily Singular, who's going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. And then we will have a question period with prepared questions by our planning team. And we'll also have questions from you as the audience. At the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A box. It's a separate box from the chat, which you can use the chat to communicate with one another. But if you have a question for the panelists, please use the Q&A box. You can type your question, and you can also vote for other questions. So we'll be prioritizing questions based on the number of people who are interested in them. So both post your questions and then also like other questions that you'd like to have the panelists answered. That way we have a broad coverage of different kinds of questions that we can hear from the panelists. So that will be the primary amount of time that we spend today. We'll be having these discussions with the panelists. And then we'll come back to this presentation here at the end with me for a few closing remarks, just for other ways that you can get involved with the Future Leaders in Conservation initiative. We have amazing panelists today. I'm so excited for the breadth of coverage of their work that they do and the geographies that they do it in. So I'm so grateful to all the panelists today. First, we have Binta Dixon, who's an Afrofuturist writer, care advocate, and coordinator for the Afrofuturism Collective. We have Dolcy Miinens, who is a guardian with the Kitigan Zibi. We have Julian García Walther, who is the Bird Lab director for Pronatura Noroeste, and Shanna Challenger, who's the Offshore Islands Conservation Program coordinator for the Environmental Awareness Group. So I'll turn it over to Emily, who will have the panelists introduce themselves. And then we'll turn it over to this question and answer period. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Quinn, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. I'll start things off by just opening the floor for Binta to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Binta, and yes, I am an Afrofuturist writer. I like to consider hopeful climate futures as well as draw inspiration from imaginative worlds where we work together with this earth. And I'm also so honored to be a coordinator for the Afrofuturism Collective, which is a project of Together for Birds with the American Bird Conservancy. And we are looking to see how diasporic wisdom can help to influence new pathways for conservation and environmental justice. And I'm currently living near Tucson, Arizona, and deeply rooted in the shores of North Carolina.
Thank you so much, Binta. Next, we'll hear from Dolcy.
Hi, everybody. Dolcy is my name. I am a Nagadjitòdjig guardian, so that basically means I do a lot of environmental work, cultural outreach with my community, and I also make short documentaries about the work that my community does to help protect our environmental and cultural concerns. I was part of the Indigenous Lands Initiative, which is a thing that's going around slowly globally now, but definitely in Canada a lot, where Indigenous communities can apply for funding to have their own environmental protection agencies in their own community and work for their community.
Thank you so much. And now we'll hear from Julian.
Hi, everybody. My name is Julian García Walther. I'm based in Ensenada, Mexico, and I'm both a PhD student, almost about to defend at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I study the effects of sea level rise on the habitat of shorebirds here in Northwest Mexico. And I also work for this regional NGO called Pronatura Noroeste, where we conserve all priority habitat for birds and other species. And for the last few years, I have been leading the expansion of the Motus network, where we try to do collaborative conservation by installing automated telemetry stations across the region and collaboratively tracking where these birds are going to better understand what their habitat needs are. And so, yeah, so happy to be here to share a little bit about my career path. And yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We're still waiting for our fourth panelist to join us, so we'll just get started with our first question for you all, which is, how did your eventual career path differ from your original plan, and what do you wish you knew when you were at the start of your career? And I'll kind of open this up so any one of the three of you can feel free to answer.
I can go ahead and answer the question first. So my original plan was to become a biologist of some sort, so like to become a marine biologist or something to do with insects. But I kind of realized that the math and science qualities were a little bit more difficult for me. So I decided the next best thing for me was digital cinematography, was making movies. So I did that for about 3 years at Canada College, and it was an amazing time for me. I loved it a lot. But when I got back home, there's not a lot of opportunities to do film work. So I kind of just hanged around in my house. And then all of a sudden, my dad gave me this job opportunity that he heard about in the community. And it was to be a Nagadjitòdjig guardian. And when I read the outlines and all the activities I could do, it sounded very overwhelming because I don't have no training in environmental work, right? So I decided, but to apply anyways. And a lot of the stuff I learned on the job. The first part was that my job wanted me to make the short documentaries. So I've been doing that. I've been doing the short documentaries, and I've been doing the environmental work and the cultural learning at the same time. So kind of got a little hats on there. And it is the best job that I ever had. I wouldn't do anything else. It allows me to combine my education, my culture, and my love for the environment all wrapped up into one. So I'm very blessed to have that type of opportunity. And what I wish I knew is that I wish I knew about it sooner, because then I could have maybe planned a little bit more accordingly, but I believe the stars aligned in my favor, and I'm just happy to have this job as a guardian for my community.
Totally. Thank you so much, Dolcy.
I can go. So, I think I fit the model of I don't know what I want since the beginning. So conservation really grew on me with the experiences that I had on life. I studied my bachelor in biology just because I knew that the only thing I knew at that moment was I want something related to nature. Actually, my cousin, a successful engineer, told me, "You're just gonna starve." But I'm happy to report that it's not the case yet. So I decided to study the bachelor in biology. At that time, my focus was in molecular ecology and biotechnology. Why? Because that was what was trendy at the moment, apparently, and that's what I specialized. And super grateful with my university. It was public, that meant that it was free, and that meant that I was not in debt when I finished. But everything changed when I got my first real job. I started working for this NGO called Island Conservation in Mexico, and I spent a few seasons on remote islands studying breeding birds. And then I suddenly thought, wow, I really want to study, see what I study and see what I conserve. And I did a 180-degree change on what I actually specialize. And I said to myself, I want to do conservation. So yeah, that was a very different career path than what I originally had planned. And so then I thought to myself, okay, I need to learn how to do conservation. And I started applying for lots of scholarships, many failed, but one of them, the one that I really wanted, got accepted to support me doing a master's abroad in Germany and New Zealand. This was an amazing program because it taught you how to do conservation by learning different contrasts and how conservation was done in different places. When the time came to do my thesis, I ended up in this bizarre moment where this Mexican was living in Germany, then being supervised by an American researcher living in Holland about shorebirds in Chile. So yeah, it was kind of bizarre. I had never done anything with shorebirds at that time. And then shorebirds start growing on me. And ever since I fallen in love with shorebirds, with migration, and after the master's, I did a bunch of different, maybe unrelated jobs, but they paved the way for where I'm now. I'm about to defend my PhD dissertation. And during the whole PhD, I started collaborating with an NGO in Mexico. And yeah, it has been a really cool journey. But okay, I think I've derailed. What are some things that I wish I would have known since the beginning? I think I wish someone would have told me that you had to network, like your life depended on that. Because really networking was what opened me so many opportunities and so many doors. But networking is not only about getting a job, it's about building a community of like-minded people. It's about having people who offer advice and support your growth. So network was the first thing. And the second thing was that I wish someone would have told me that conservation, it's not just about charismatic species. You don't need to go to work with wolves and lemurs and paradise birds. There's a lot of species that are just there in the place where you live that deserve equal attention. And you can actually find a niche of work with those species and become noticed and become a successful conservation. So yeah. And finally, I still struggle with this one, valuing your work. In university, they taught me how to do research, how to analyze data, but they never taught me how to put a price on my skills and to my time. And doing that actually results on you being compensated fairly in conservation. And yeah, it's very easy in conservation to undervalue your expertise out of passion or a sense of duty. So yeah, put a value on your work. It's something really cool to learn. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you, Dolcy and Julian. For me, my path was definitely not linear. I worked all through college. I needed to work even before I went to college. And what I usually do was work in community spaces. So I worked in educating young children and working in a community capacity. And so I went to school to be an anthropologist. I wanted to do social science research, working in Africa and the diaspora. And did that my bachelor's. I got my bachelor's in social anthropology, went to grad school and combined African diaspora studies program. Quickly realized that I needed for my own health and wellness to be grounded in community. And so I was already working in a community-based organization in African American and other diaspora communities. And I realized that I needed my work to be supporting those communities. I didn't want to be solely doing research that was only being discussed with other scientists, although I truly value that work. That was very important to me. I wanted that base. So I made a switch. I switched my major actually to master's in public administration so that I could take the research I had done for the first 2 years and take that into a community setting because that's where I saw the most need. And that was where, honestly, I was first kind of started thinking about climate change and environmental issues. I was in Miami, living in Overtown, living right next to a cement plant. And the cement plant shared a wall with Dorsey Park. And so I would see the kids playing there. I would see the dust accumulating in the neighborhood. And I thought about, what are these kids breathing in? What am I breathing in? And then certainly the animals, what are they being exposed to? So as I continued that work, there were these little sparks of wondering of what is the connection between the environment and with people and the work that I'm doing in communities that are under-resourced and stressed. And so that kind of led me to working specifically with gardening programs and food support programs alongside youth programs. And that's where I learned actually even what conservation was. This was about 2016. I was working with a national nonprofit, and we did a program that kind of exposed me to how African American communities were most affected by some conservation issues and why it was so important. And so through this whole time and through my life, there was this love of birds. My grandmother was, I would say, a birder, even though she probably wouldn't call herself that. And so when I finally met Namo, who is a director of Together with Birds for American Bird Conservancy, it made sense for me to talk more about this community connection with birds. Like, what is this relationship that communities have with birds and with the environment, and how can we foster that more? And so after almost a decade of doing specifically community-based works that's doing environmental exposure, nature exposure, I made this kind of transition into conservation at the intersection, I would say, at conservation and education and community work, because I want to be able to foster more of those connections. And so that's how I became an advocacy coordinator with the American Bird Conservancy, and eventually also became a coordinator with the Afrofuturism Collective. And so what do I wish I would have known? I think I wish I would have known I didn't have to know it all. I wish I would have known that it was okay to be unsure in my path, that I could ask more questions, that I could talk to more people who were in their careers and say, like, hey, how did you get here? I think that would have been really helpful. And also that I could slow down, that I didn't have to go straight from my bachelor's to my master's to my PhD in record time, that I could take some time to work in communities, take some time to figure out what exactly it was that was most important to me, and to do some of that community building work, because it was those folks who helped to guide me. And if I hadn't taken the time to work in early care education, to work in education in other capacities, to work in community gardens, I don't think that I would be where I am today.
Thank you all so much for your answers. I think a lot of us can really relate to that windy road that led us to conservation and where we are today. I wanted to pause and take a moment to introduce Shanna Challenger. She is our fourth panelist. Shanna, we'll ask you to please introduce yourself, and then if you're able to answer the question about, oh goodness, how did your eventual career path differ from your original plan? And what do you wish you knew when you were at the start of your career?
Hello, everybody. It's good to see so many faces. I really apologize for being late. The time converter got me. So I thought it was an hour ahead, and I'm in another workshop, but I am here and I'm ready to be able to share with all of you today about my journey in conservation. So thank you, Emily, for the little brief introduction. So a bit about me. I am from the very small Caribbean island of Antigua and Barbuda. We are known for having 365 beaches. Feel free to visit us, shameless plug. But we also are known for having a lot of wildlife, endemic species, etc. And I didn't know this when I was growing up. So I would say that throughout my upbringing, I was always around animals. So my grandmother, she lived in the middle of town in Barbados, and she had like ducks and geese. I remember the first time I saw a kitten being born, I was crying like if I was the one who had pushed out the baby. Like I was really always into animals. When we had, I know a little controversial, but when we had like a dolphin enclosure here, my parents would take me there. I've always been around animals. And sadly, in the Caribbean, I think it's starting to shift now, but sadly, in the Caribbean, once you're really into science, they kind of say, okay, well, you have to become a doctor. That's the only path, the straight and narrow, there's no deviation. That's just what you're into. And so I was always into biology, chemistry, physics, etc. And it's kind of funny that when you're in third form or ninth grade, that is when in the Caribbean you make the decision at 14 whether you're going to be doing business subjects or science subjects. That is the crossroads, and it dictates your life forever. So I chose again the science path. And so I did science up until college, and then it came time for university. And again, I didn't want to, so it's either, I should say, it's either a doctor or a teacher. And I didn't want to teach. So I said, well, I guess I just have to become a doctor. So I started the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill in Barbados. And I will always say I'm very grateful for UE because they teach you a little bit of everything when you're in your first year. So no matter what you're doing, they teach you a bit of ecology, a bit of biochemistry, which is They teach you a little bit of every little aspect of it so that you can kind of get a sense and a taste of what aspect of this degree do I really, really like. And when I was doing the subjects, I remember we were talking about diversity of life. We were talking about how all of the families of species are related. Evolution, that first fish that came up on the land. Like, can you imagine? Like, we're the first fish to come up there. And I just love the fact that for my courses, I didn't have to be indoors. Like my friends who are into accounting and stuff, they'll be at class. I'll be like, okay, I'm going to a mangrove today. Okay, I'm going to the beach snorkeling today. I just loved being outside all of the time. And so I actually ended up, similar to what Binta mentioned, I changed my major on like a random Wednesday afternoon because I had seen a lot of students, and I should say, at UE, you have the students who are from that country who get like a reduced rate that they have to pay. And then the regional ones, those of us who come in, we have to pay a bit more. And I saw so many people who had come in and were spending their parents' money or the scholarship money just doing courses over in school for 7 years. And that was also a drawback from medicine because I didn't have the time to spend 7 years in school. So I changed my major on a random Wednesday afternoon to ecology. Turns out that you should actually tell your scholarship provider that you're going to change your major, which I didn't. I was following my heart. I should have been following my brain. That's one of the things I knew. I should have been following my brain and do things the correct way. But I did end up getting my scholarship back again once I wrote a very nicely worded letter about why ecology was important in Antigua and Barbuda. And I graduated with a degree in ecology in 2016. 2 months before I graduated, my mom said, okay, girl, you need to look for a job. You need to get a job. So I started looking online because a part of my scholarship requirement, I had to go back to Antigua. And I saw this NGO, the Environmental Awareness Group, this side, who I now work for, or EAG. And they had this advertisement to restore this island that I had heard about growing up, but the only thing you would hear is that there were goats over there, rats over there, half goat, half humans over there, but that was all that you knew. And it was this unique opportunity to restore this island, tell people about it, get it protected, etc. And so it was such a unique opportunity. I actually ended up applying, and that was all she wrote. Ever since then, I've actually been in the field of conservation. Once I finished with the Redonda Restoration Program, in 2017, our sister island Barbuda was actually affected by Category 5 Hurricane Irma, which I'm sure quite a few of you know about. And it actually almost wiped out our only endemic bird, the Barbuda warbler. And so I was very much into snakes, etc. But seeing how crazy the ornithologists were getting over this bird, I was like, what's the hype? What's all the hubbub about? Until I actually went to Barbuda and helped with the environmental impact assessments. And I said, so birding is just like a game show. It's kind of like a puzzle. You're trying to figure out what is that? What is it doing? How does it sound? Where is it going? And since then, I have been locked in with birds. I'm a very proud bird nerd. Anytime I have work, I kind of find a way to increase the amount of bird stuff that we can do. And so I think, sorry, I know my preamble was a little bit long, but I also want to talk about what I wish I knew at the start of my career. The first thing, I wish I knew how much accounting is involved in project management. Like I said, I did science or business. I went the science route, so I never did any accounts courses, never did any business courses. And I wish I had taken some sort of accounting or financial management because it's integrated in everything you do. The next thing I wish I knew as well is how important it is to be a people person. A lot of times as scientists, we can kind of get wrapped up in the science, like especially the plant people. I'm sure we have plant people on the call, but you know, they'll rattle off in Latin and making sure that you're able to communicate with people for what you want them to know. Because if you're doing all the work and you can't communicate to people effectively about why it's important or why they should value it, etc., then it's not going to be successful. And the last thing I would say that I wish I knew is how flexible and open the world of conservation is. There's a need for every single person, whether it's lichen, it's fungi, it's inverts, it's plants, it's animals. There's so many things that can be in this field and in the environmental field as in general. You don't even have to be a biologist out in the field with me. Like I prefer to be out in the field. When I speak to the birds and the snakes, they can't talk back to me rather than dealing with the people aspect. You can be an environmental lawyer, you can be a wildlife illustrator, you can be an environmental filmmaker. There's so many opportunities under this umbrella. So that's my little 2 cents. Again, very happy to be
here. Yeah. Thank you so much, Shanna. It was great to hear from you and about how you got here. We have one more question prepared by the organizers, and then we'll move into our Q&A. So keep on dropping your questions in that Q&A box, and you can put them in Spanish as well. So our next question, and we'll just open this up for any of the panelists, is if you could change one thing about the way conservation is approached globally, what would that be?
I can start with this. I want conservation projects to start with community conversations, to go into who are the indigenous people in those spaces, who are the communities, the folk, the stewards, the present day stewards, the historical stewards, and ask questions. I saw someone say something about, like non-science skills, and I think listening is one of the most important skills that I've developed over my career, being willing to listen and ask questions. And I think that beyond that, I hope that an approach could be interdisciplinary. So we need the hard science. We need that. It's the foundation of what we do. But we also need arts as well. We need the filmmakers. We need the writers, whether that's fiction or other kind of storytelling, the journalists as well. We need our other kind of visual artists to be able to articulate what it is that's happening in the environment. And I think to help folks understand that bridge between the scientific into the general public and into the social understanding of a community, I think is something I would love to see change.
I agree 100% on that, and I was also tapping into that. I think it's something challenging for me because I was not trained like that, but involving local communities on the decision-making process of conservation is what I would like to see change. Just in many conservation projects right now, many of the policies are given top down, and that means that many times we're ignoring the needs and the knowledge and what people have to say where conservation is being implemented. So if instead of that we value their input, instead of just telling what to do, we can make more sustainable and better conservation solutions and strategies. Again, it's tough because most of us weren't trained about that, and because you're putting a lot more factors involved with just working with animals. But it would be awesome that we actually start doing it, and I'm happy because in many places we're actually starting to do it. Yeah.
I'll go next. I think what to change about it globally is that we shouldn't just think about conservation as just an area, protect it and leave it be. It could be like many areas. The whole world can be a conservation area because at the end of the day, that's what it is. We live with nature and nature has to put up with us. So I would like people to be more like you said, community level, like ground level, more I don't know what the word is there, but I guess more community sense level to know where are you talking about, what area you're talking about, and who are the people that live there, and how did they live there? How did these people survive for such a long time without affecting the environment so much, and why are we having these problems now? So maybe even like a little bit of a history, learning about the area, wherever you come from, and just being more on a one-to-one level instead of looking up and taking directions from people who may have the information but not the knowledge of the land and the waters that they're making these legislative decisions on.
I can go. I think so. I work with an environmental NGO and we're very donor dependent. And I think one thing that I would really like to change is a difference in the funding for conservation. A lot of times the grants are either very restrictive in what they will fund or they're very short term. And especially with what is going on in the place that we know that we are talking about, especially with what's going on over there, all of us are being affected, right? So even the people who would reliably give money, they're giving less money or they're not giving money at all. And so I think there needs to be a shift in how funding for conservation is approached, like less short term, 1 year type things and more 3 years or continue funding so that you can have more impact and spend less time writing grants and writing proposals and more time actually implementing without having to worry, where's my salary going to come from this month. So that's one thing I would love to.
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts about the people and the financial piece of conservation. Might not be what come to mind first, but those are definitely really important things. We're going to move into some of our audience questions. The first question I'll share is from Paul Schmidt, who asked, how can the older and retiring generation enable you to achieve your goals and nurture your journey in conservation?
I can maybe start with a simplistic suggestion. I think I find myself between the new generation and the old generation. And what I have seen from the old generation, not always, but is that they are not embracing change. There's a little bit of what is the word? Resistance to some new ideas and new project ideas. And then the other side is that I'm having interns and students that are just coming from university proposing new things that are just amazing. So if you leave them do their thing and open them to exploring these new ideas, good things are coming out, and I sometimes getting mind blown of what they're doing. So just giving the opportunity to start those ideas and implement those ideas can make good things come out.
I can go next. So for myself, the older generation, I learned a lot of my knowledge from the older generation. So a lot of the work is that they've seen the changes in, let's say, like an animal population. For example, I'll talk about the American eel. When they talk about it, they used to say that there used to be so much of this eel going through the rivers, finding them in creeks, finding them deep in the mud, and that now that these eels are going away due to dams and pollution and the roadways cut off and just straight on the slaughter of the eels because they're not pretty fish. The older generation helps guides me into this direction of what places where to look for these eels, where were the historical ranges of these eels, and what are some things that they've noticed, whether it deal with like the temperature or on how to hunt and capture eels or how to transfer them. They provide a lot of that insight for myself on how to help conserve these certain animal species. That's just an example for myself.
I can share next. One, I would like to say that I think that multi-generational work is so key for this work of conservation. And a story that comes to mind is I was starting a new high-level position in organization, and I was very nervous. There were a lot of dynamics happening, both in the field. We know in conservation, there's always things that are changing. And I had maybe 4 different elders reach out to me to just schedule, and they were not in the organization. These were people in the field, schedule calls with me just to talk, to find out about me and what I was doing, to see where they could support me and what resources they could provide. And those relationships really helped sustain me throughout that time at that organization. I think that sometimes it can feel from both sides like there's a little bit of tension, like, elders don't really know how to approach younger folks and if their advice is going to be received. Younger folks sometimes feel a little nervous about how to have conversations or how to push things forward. But I think the most important thing is just to begin. And knowing that I had that support from them, I was able to ask more questions. I was able to present my new ideas. And then I'd ask them, have you ever done anything like this before? Even if it's not exactly the same, what was your experience? Because that knowledge is so important. And I find that they are a lot of times folks are willing to go with you into those new spaces if they know that they're also being respected. Yeah, that's what I would say. Just try to start the conversation, see where you can find someone who's early in their career and just reach out to them, just to have a conversation with them.
I can interject here as well. I think the older generation, they like to be engaged, even if they're against it. The fact that the young whippersnapper, sorry for the translators, I hope that can translate, but if the young, the young person comes to them, and even if they disagree, they appreciate that you came and asked for their advice, or at least told them and involved them in the process. I think as scientists, it's also very important to monitor environmental changes. And so a lot of the historical knowledge about what a place, an ecosystem used to look like, what they used to use it for example, we were doing a mangrove restoration project in this coastal community. And one of the members of the community group, his mother came out on one of the field trips, and she was telling us about what this plant was used for, the fact that they would go skating in the mangrove on a moonlit night. And so these are things that, of course, we wouldn't be privy to, but we were able to document so that there is some sort of, written record of what this area used to be used for, and what can happen next. And I think the other part of it, I'm putting my mom into this now, older/retired people, they have a lot of free time. And so if there are aspects of your project that can happen, that are during working hours that a regular person would be able to do, the older generation, they can do that. So whether that is citizen science, if they're helping to, call some birds or talk to an important person, they definitely have free time and want something to do. So giving them something that is manageable and still has impact, I think is really
Thank you. It was cool to hear your thoughts on change from the older generation, as well as really being that knowledge base as we learn and move forward, as well as the volunteer help. I know some of us work with those citizen scientists and the retirees who can help a lot with some projects. The next question that we'll ask you all is from Justin Saunders, who wondered what non-science skills have been the most important for you to learn to support your career and conservation work.
For myself, the most important non-science skills would be more of the artistic side. So for myself, it was doing short documentaries, filming, and that type of stuff. For myself, I think it's a lot more easier to reach a wider audience and convey your message through arts, through visual storytelling. So through, movies, documentaries, because you can give people a piece of paper or this document and tell them to read it. They might not be quite as engaged or may not understand the words. But if you give them, a 5-minute, 2-minute documentation about why this certain tree species is so important to the community or to the world or to whoever, they'll be more engaged because there's something to actively capture their listening and their visual, and it's easier for them to comprehend and to understand. So I would say environmental work and artistic work definitely goes hand in hand, and it's definitely a different type of language to help convey to others to support you on your conservation work. And yeah.
I agree with Dolcy. Photography has helped me reach many persons and better communicate my findings, better connect with people. One single picture says a lot more than a whole presentation sometimes. But the second thing that I'm still learning is actually how to communicate, as they were saying, how to listen, how to rapport with people, because I used to consider my work to be only with the animals, but this has been evolving a lot through the years, and communicating with people in the communities is just key. And different groups and different sectors, you communicate a little bit differently. So to me, those kind of soft skills that are still in development and have been key, and I've been learning from many people on how to improve them to be able to do successful conservation projects that are aligned with the community. Yeah.
I would say definitely I echoed and agree with what Julian and Dolcy both shared. I also think that presentation skills have been really important. So learning how to share my thoughts, learning how to do things like this on being on a panel, even if it's just a couple people in a room. I used to be really nervous speaking in front of people. And so it took a while for me to just develop that skill, and practice definitely helps. The other thing, which is maybe a little different, is well-being. So, conservation is work that can be really stressful. We're all experiencing intense stressors, both maybe in our personal lives and also because of the work that we're doing. We see what's happening to our beautiful earth. So being active in whatever way, making sure that you have the skill of finding some kind of routine that supports your body and your mind. That is the way that I've been able to sustain myself in the work. And I just encourage you, whatever that is, to find a way to be physically active and find some emotional, mental support.
Um, Agreeing with everybody, with the artistic side. I always say I'm not artistic, but I'm good in Canva. So um, if you're able to, again, translate your message into a visual and engaging way, content creation, etc., it's a really good way to get people involved in your mission. I also want to bring in some other skills that I think are really important. So people management. So like I said, I used to work in a job where in my previous position, it was just me, the animals, that's it. But now I'm working in one of the most visited protected areas in the country, which means a lot of people things. And the thing is that everybody is not always going to agree. In fact, most times you might disagree. So having some sort of stakeholder engagement, conflict resolution, negotiating kind of skills are very important. Coming up with ingenious ways to make sure you still get what you want without, presenting it as the usual, oh, I just care about the planet kind of thing. And then one really, really important thing that you have to have as a conservationist is critical thinking, especially when you're doing your proposals, etc. You have to think about what are all the possible things that could go wrong? What are the things that can derail this? What are the things that can help it? You have to think of every single possibility, which means I can't turn off that skill. So I'm always thinking about what could possibly happen. But it's a really, really good skill to have, and it strengthens your proposal and your execution of your projects because you've thought about what can happen and done things to mitigate them from derailing.
Thank you all for sharing those thoughts. Our next question really kind of ties into that communication piece. Cody Carlisle asked, could you all tell us how you use storytelling in conservation and how others can improve their skills in storytelling for conservation?
I can start this one off. Storytelling is kind of the root, I think, of my work. I started, in community engagement. And so that is about storytelling for advocacy. And that's also what I did with the American Bird Conservancy when I first started. And I think it really starts with, I think, understanding the emotionality of something. So what is it? what is it that we're talking about in terms of what people can see, feel, experience? So for myself, for instance, I wrote a piece about my connection to cardinals. It's a bird that I love so much because I grew up with it. It's one of the first birds that I probably remember seeing as a child. And when I came back to my hometown many, many years ago, I realized that the same birds in my home and where I grew up were probably descendants of those same birds that I grew up with because they're non-migratory. And if the environment is supportive of them, then they're not going to necessarily always move from there. So that was like a connection point for me. And telling that story helped me to weave in the conservation notes, right? I'm talking about my personal connection to this bird, but I'm also talking about what it takes to have an environment where they would stay, where I can have that coming back, that connection piece. And so I think for me, storytelling is about the emotional connection, the heart connection we make with people and the environment. It's also about being honest, being emotionally honest with how something feels, whether that is visual or in writing. And I also think it's about imagination. Even when we're telling the truth, we can weave in an imagination. And I think it's so important to do so, especially when we're living in a world where we have such dire things going on. So how can you present the reality, present the facts, and then imagine with the audience what is possible if we work together, if we make a change, if we are working together in conservation. So those are some of the things that I can do. And to improve your storytelling, I would say start with personal essays and stories. Ask yourself simple questions like, what was the first time I remember seeing a bird or going to the ocean? Or what was that like? What did it leave you with? What did you come away with? And then you can move from there into telling different kinds of stories for advocacy. Let's see, there's another one thing I wanted to share about working in the Southwest specifically and doing storytelling here. So it's a place where there is really this community-centered focus. So stuff really happens on the ground. And so being able to get the stories from the folks who were there, maybe not working in conservation specifically, but who live in the communities, really did help me to get a grasp on the policy. So I couldn't have really understood what was happening on a policy level or a conservation level without first listening to the stories of the people on the ground and helping them to tell those stories. So I think that articulates for me just how powerful stories can be. Thanks.
I love Binta's response, and I definitely don't think I can beat it. And I'm actually learning a lot about it. But I would say that just storytelling, as she says, um, you can take the learning to other kinds of storytelling, such as grant writing, which is essentially storytelling, just with a little bit of like facts and citations, you know? You can take these storytelling to your presentations, having a flow where these stories fit in your conservation story. And then you're making your grants a lot more compelling. You're telling what you want to do, but within a story, right? So in essence, storytelling is an art, but this art gets better by practicing, and to practice, you need to start. So I think what Binta said is just a great answer.
I can go next. So for myself, like I said, I am a cinematographer, so I use film to share my stories. And the reason why I use film to share my stories is because A, I find it's easier to engage people. Even for myself, I find it's easier for me to watch something and retain it rather than reading a bunch of words. On the second part of what Bintana, is that your name? Bintana?
Binta.
Bintana. What Bintana said about having that emotional connection with it, that's definitely needed. You can make a story about anything, but if it's not doesn't have that juice, that meat, that core with it, it's not going to be engaging to people, and people are not going to know how to relate to it because it doesn't pertain to them. For example, I did my first film on Paganakalman, which is a tree species in my community that was very plentiful and it had a lot of nuts with it, and my people, they really liked it. Now, for me, that's important, but for you guys, it might not be because you don't have that connection, right? So with that film, I'm supposed to create this like you said, imaginative kind of like history with it. Like this tree once roamed the many woods of my forest, and due to deforestation and people not respecting, and it went declining, and now there's few survivors. So you're trying to reel in people with your story, you know, you want to get them relating to it, you want to get them to know it. So yeah, like and you know, art can take many forms. It doesn't have to just be filming. It could be drawing, it could be pictures, it could be like you said, like writing too. Writing is a very key thing to skill to have. And how to improve your skill? Well, like my other panelist said, is that you need to practice it. I didn't just start off making movies like that, no problem, no fuss, no muss. No, it takes practice. You learn for myself, like what scenes and what kind of music to put to portray the feeling that I want the audience to feel. If I want them to feel, you know, very hopeful, well, then maybe I'll put something with sunshine, maybe a lighter picture, lighter colors, more joyful music. And if I want them to feel a little more sad that the tree's gone, maybe I'll show trees falling down or being cut or dead, and maybe put some somber music towards the end. That way the audience is engaged, and there I'm um, improving my skill by seeing what fits better with what. It's kind of like creating like a little puzzle piece. You want to put the right puzzle to the right place. That way it creates a beautiful picture, right? Thank you.
I will echo what all the other panelists have said. I also think it's very important to realize that you are a marketer for conservation. You as yourself, it's really important for you to be able to sell this story that you're telling, right? And our NGO, our social media is pretty good. Again, shameless plug, EAG Antigua, if you want to check it out on Instagram. But what we always find is when we post species, like, okay, the likes will be fine. But when we post people, it is always a lot better. People love seeing people, hearing people. It's really a proven way to connect with people. And I think your audience is also very important. So depending on who you're speaking to should also influence what your story is and how you want them, like Dolcy said, how you want them to feel. It's not just, okay, this is the information. What is the emotion that they're attaching to what you're saying? How can they understand what you're trying to convey? So if it's a group of policymakers, how do you contribute this to what it will be for the long-term improvement of the country, etc.? If it's a group of tertiary level students and you feel them kind of falling asleep, then you put in something about the fact that one of the islands is shaped like a specific kind of toy, and that kind of perks them up, like, oh, that's about that, you know, or this species does this, you know, finding ways to keep them engaged and let them remember at least one thing out of what you were trying to convey.
Muchas gracias por esas respuestas. No, no olviden que también
Thank you all very much for your answers. Please keep in mind that you can also write your questions down in Spanish in the chat. And we have the first one from Tatiana Sanchez. I hope that you can see that the English channel is working okay. She's asking, so regarding conservation, bird conservation, could you please share some positive outcomes in which you consider, well, you've considered components of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and diversity? Did everyone hear that?
Yes, I can start. I just came from the field last week, no, like a couple of days ago, and we had to go and capture red notes, put some transmitters and release them. And I was supported by a community-led group of women, mostly, and men of all ages. Like I think the younger ones are maybe like 18, and the older one like 70. And this community-led group of women and men protect red knots and other shorebirds in Golfo de Santa Clara. And I mean, we have been working alongside them for several years, but just going back there and seeing all that they have accomplished due to their diversity in ages, in genders, in ways of doing things, it just blows my mind. And it's one of the best examples that I have of how community-led diversity and inclusion and like how consulting local communities and letting them actually take the lead on many of these projects gives the best of the best results. So if you want to follow them, they're Cuidando el Playo Rojizo del Pejerrey. They're on Instagram. And yeah, it's just great. Yeah.
I can speak to that too. Well, I think that the American Bird Conservancy and Together with Birds program, that is the work that we do is infuse JEDI and justice, equity, diversity, inclusion into our work. So we have fellowships that I think we have 14 fellows this year that are working in places like Barbados, in different indigenous lands throughout the Americas. So even in Mexico, and throughout the US to kind of bring their specific stewardship knowledge into conservation. And it's been wonderful to watch. And also the Afrofuturism Collective, that is our work as well. So we have folks who are working specifically with waterways. We have several folks who are visual artists who are creating work. We have someone who is working specifically to create a template for Afrofuturist principles to be infused into any kind of project that you're doing in conservation. We have several storytellers who are doing work about birds specific to African myths or African diasporic myths, and kind of trying to, as Shanna was talking about, help folks to understand, like, make that connection between something someone will recognize and why conservation is important to them. So I think, and also someone spoke a little bit about funding. So being able to have projects that widen the scope in this way, that bring in indigenous knowledge, that bring in knowledge from other stewards, such as African diasporic folks, in a way that's not an afterthought, that's actually the pillar of the work, I think is so important. And I'm just really honored to be watching those projects develop, and hopefully to share that out more as we go. And I definitely recommend looking at the fellowships that we also have through the Together with Birds project as well.
I want to speak just very quickly, especially about the accessibility point. One of the things that we have done every year, Birds Caribbean, Regional Bird NGO, they celebrate the Caribbean Endemic Bird Festival. And one of the things that we have done is that we actually decided to prioritize a vulnerable group, and it was the Antigua and Barbuda group for persons with disabilities. And so what we actually ended up doing is going and having a presentation for them. And they're people who are physically challenged, mentally challenged, visually challenged, etc. And so it really kind of challenged us, but they were very interested in birds, because who isn't? But it was very challenging and a good way for us to make sure we could communicate birds to them despite some of their limitations. So for example, the people who couldn't see, making sure they mastered the bird sound. So even though they can't see the bird, they can hear it and be able to identify it. Doing different cues so that they're still able to participate. So even persons who are in wheelchairs, etc., they could participate in the birding. There's also a group called Birdability, I think they are, on Instagram. They also do a lot of that work, making sure that birding, bird conservation in general is accessible to all, and they're able to play a role in doing the work.
I'm just a little bit unsure how to answer the question. Because like we work with a lot of things, not just like with birds. But if one thing I guess I could say is that with my job we have a range of people from different ages. So we have a lot of older people who are in like their 50s and 60s, and then plus my age range, which is like in their early 20s. And we did a project where we talk with older people in our community, so a lot of elders. And we talked about their stories and talked about what they've seen with like with the birds too. A lot of them notice that a lot of their songbirds, there's now less of them, or they don't hear as much as the like, diversity of bird songs when they go out. And with that, it helps us keep track of that data through the audio recordings and plus the transcribing of it. And if they have the indigenous name for the birds, so it kind of helps us create an awareness for that we didn't know that these different bird species are in decline, or that we get to learn about their native names. And with that, we are able to spread that information, to other people. We do work with like a school, so that includes, everybody, teachers, students, whoever wants to participate to transfer this knowledge so that now collectively as a community that we're all aware of these issues. And once we know about the issue, then we'll have more understanding of how to help make sure that these issues be fixed.
Totally. Thank you all for sharing your answers to that question. We have a little bit more time left, so feel free to add any more questions to that Q&A box. But I have another prepared question from the organizers, and that is, how do you define success in conservation in your own field?
I can go. For myself, I define success when the information is related to other people. So if I'm able to talk with somebody who I don't see day to day or work with, so usually like even with like the little kids, younger generation, when they understand what I'm talking about and that they feel the need to do something about it, and I can see their spark in their eye, that gives me a sign of success. Or when I host workshops, that they're very engaged in learning. It doesn't have to be just young people either, like the older generation too. So some of their knowledge has been taken away from them. So for me, I'm kind of helping bridge that gap between what they learn and what we are doing now. And once I see them, they feel comfortable. They're more open to talking about, knowledge that they weren't allowed to share. For me, that's a success because I've done my job of relaying information. And, to get these things done, it's not just a one-person job, it's a community effort. So, yeah, for me, that success is when the community knows what's going on.
I guess in my case, broadly and maybe utopically, it would be to see society coexisting in harmony with nature, but in a day-to-day basis, conservation is a work in progress, right? And things take time. So I guess sometimes I just try to celebrate the little successes that we have on the day-to-day. That's what keeps me going. And that might look very different from the day-to-day. One day could be like, I filled a knowledge gap of this particular bird, and now I can take better decisions. One day it could be we talk to a person, and due to these talking to this person, they are not driving their ATVs on the beach and crashing nests. So all those little successes, I think it's worth celebrating, and it's what keeps you motivated. And success will look different on a grant and on the field. Sometimes successes is like I managed to capture a bird and tagged it, or or I went to the field and I'm okay. Nothing went wrong. I'm healthy. We didn't even have an accident, So yeah, success comes in different forms and shapes.
I love what Julian said just now. I think success, it literally depends on day to day. Sometimes it can be something very small, like somebody saying, oh, they heard you. Because a lot of times when you're doing outreach, you don't know if it's actually getting out to people. So when somebody says, oh, yeah, Shanna, I saw you on the TV, I saw you, like, okay, yes, it's working. People are engaged. I think for me, because our NGO focuses a lot on rewilding ecosystems by removing invasive species. For me, it's seeing an ecosystem rebounding, seeing a chick actually being able to survive to adulthood without, getting eaten by a rat, like little things like that. Sometimes it is just programmatic, okay? These are the things that I said I was going to do, and I actually got them done. Great. Or sometimes it's like, this is the big thing I'm working towards, but I've been able to inch forward, and tick off these little steps towards getting to that too. So yeah, dependent on the day, but you have to celebrate those successes. That's what is also very important. Being very happy that, I didn't die in the field today and fall off that cliff. That's a win. I didn't get impaled by a cactus today. That never happens because I'm always impaled. But it can be very different, but making sure you bask in it and don't let the next project come and you haven't reflected on all the things you were able to achieve.
Yes, I completely agree with all my fellow panelists and everything they shared. I think for me right now, success is feeling like sparking someone to action, right? Especially like young folks to act in their local communities. And also, I think success for me right now is folks who would not consider themselves a conservationist or wouldn't consider themselves involved in environmental justice, seeing that their knowledge and their life is valuable to this work. So whether it's an abuela who like is looking at birds in her local community, or a young person who wants to take on responsibility of tending a small garden, that they see that that is conservation work, that they are involved, and that the terms don't deter them. So I think success for me is widening who is a conservationist.
Really. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on those successes. Our next question is a little bit of the opposite of that. And that is, what strategies do you use to reconnect with hope during times when you're feeling down?
I'll go first. So for myself, for my own mental well-being, if I'm feeling under the weather and I'm feeling like there's too many jobs to do and there's not enough time to do it and they all got these time constraints and whatever, I will honestly take some time for myself, some time off, and just go kind of ground myself in the forest. Like I'll just take a moment to breathe, take a moment to be present, look around, see what's around you, look at the small things, look at the insects flying, look at the snails climbing, look at the wind blowing through the breeze, just kind of reminding myself like it's not that bad. It's just a bad, it's just a bad day or it's just a bad time, but we'll get over it. Just like with nature, it's very resilient. You are very resilient. You just have to, give yourself that time to breathe. Nature's not always go, 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 like how it is in these societies. You have to take time for yourself. And what I also do is I'll just listen to other people talk, my other coworkers talk. Um, they'll usually have a lot more energy than me, and sometimes they'll just cheer me up with their own days or what's something that they learned throughout their own work that they did. Like for example, my coworker is right now listening to elders' videos, and if I go see her, she'll tell me something that an elder said, and it'll just be either like a funny story or something that's cool, like they used to harvest birch bark and make these extravagant crafts or something. And it'll just kind of remind me of why I'm doing this work and who I'm doing it for. And it'll just kind of give me that little boost up, that little spark to keep me going. But I think it's most important that you just take time to, breathe. As they say, smell the roses, because it can be very fast paced sometimes.
I think for me, number one is spending time in nature. So if I can get to a park, if I can go for a walk, if I can just spend time outside, I totally agree with Dolcy. Like it reminds me that of my place in with the earth. And it's a really grounding experience. The second is reading and writing hopeful climate futurism. So there's incredible work out there, beautiful stories about climate futures that are hopeful. And I really encourage you to, if you're into short stories or even if you're not, just take a moment and consider reading some of it. Imagine 2020. Yeah, I think this. Imagine 2020 is an amazing collection. And I might be getting the name wrong, but you can look it up. It's from GIST, from GRIST. And thank you, Kier, for putting that in the chat. Love that. And writing myself into these futures, right? Seeing Black folks, seeing people of color in these hopeful futures is one way that I stay grounded in hope. And the third one thing is connecting with people, connecting with other folks who are doing this work or maybe not, just to share why I'm feeling down and to connect. And, usually I'll feel uplifted after I leave a group of people after we've shared.
I think we need to make a distinction that often when we go to the field to do conservation, we are in the conservation on the conservation mode. We are in work mode, and while we enjoy our work and there's passion, we are still connected to work. And there's a distinction, as they say, to disconnect from work and go and enjoy nature. If you have a hobby, which in my case, most of them are directly related to nature, just take the time to actually enjoy that hobby. I remember when I started getting more responsibility at my work, I stopped doing photography. I just didn't have the time to be capturing birds or tagging birds and then taking my camera. So when I feel like things are not going well, I also disconnect from work, take out my camera, or go and swim on the sea and just do that and not think on work for a few hours. And that usually refreshes me and improves my well-being, because conservation, it's long-term, and we need to maintain our well-being in order to be able to do conservation on the long haul.
Okay, I'm going to give a very Caribbean answer. If if I don't want to say that people need vices, right? But sometimes if you want to just have a night out and just kind of forget about what is going on and, go drinking and dancing in the nightclub with your friends, that's also a coping mechanism. I also like what Julian said. Sometimes for me, well, obviously birding is my therapy, but sometimes it's also good to be in nature, but doing something that I don't often do. So if I need a really good de-stressor, I will hit up one of our partners who does coral reef restoration and go diving with them. I love going diving as a reset because you're just underwater, the world is happening above you, and you can just be in the moment and just, soak in everything. Or sometimes it's also good to kind of look back on, okay, maybe this thing is not working, this thing is not working. Look at all the things that I actually have to do. I like how Dolcy and Binta talked about, just talking and discussing with their friends. It's okay to have like a bench session, like just let it all out, even if you all need to scream, because chances are a lot of people are dealing with the same issues, and it's good to have a kind of sounding board. And even though you might not have a resolution at the end of it, at least you're able to, let out all of that emotion. And again, of course, if you're very spiritual as well, take it to God. Just ask Him to assist and intervene where possible, but make sure that you don't let all of the weight of everything and feeling like there's very few of us who are dedicated to this thing kind of suffocate you. The last thing I would say that keeps me grounded as well is seeing that there are more people that look like me right here in Antigua and Barbuda who are interested in becoming like us, becoming in parts of conservation and actually looking at it as a career intentionally from high school, from college. So knowing that even if I'm not able to get all of the work done, there's somebody coming behind me who can also support and get
Yeah, thank you all for sharing those strategies for grounding and hope. I will definitely be doing some of those myself. Our second to last question for today is how can we widen the understanding of what conservation is and what should it be? So thinking about how we understand conservation.
Oh man, this is a very philosophical question. Um, I think maybe we should recognize that conservation is evolving and that maybe we need to move just beyond that traditional old idea that conservation is simply protecting the wild and endangered species. Recognize that we live on a very interconnected world where conservation should be a concern of everybody, of humans, of corporations, of the communities that live within it, of economic systems. And I think changing the narrative of what conservation is would help to reach all of those different groups of people to let them know that conservation is important for that given sector, right? So, yeah, something like that. So maybe reframing how conservation should be viewed, given the sector or the group of people, to try to convince them that it's worth doing conservation for the good of everybody.
I can go next. So for me, the wide understanding of conservation, of what it is and what it should be, I say learning to accept and acknowledge different perspectives and allowing yourself to shift those rigid preconceptions of what you think conservation is. So like knowing like who taught you what conservation is, what is your definition of conservation, and once you kind of know like what you think about it, like, for example, when I always thought about conservation, I always thought about, okay, it's going to be a park or a certain area that's going to be, you have to pay to get in, there's going to be people working it, and there's no like camping or hunting or fishing, yada yada yada. To me, that's what I I was taught and understood as conservation, but as I grew up and learning from my people and stuff, I realized that conservation is listening people to of the respective territories, so listening to the indigenous people because they've been there, so they must know how to live with the land. So once you learn that, and then learning how to incorporate Western science practices, because with those things, they help create solutions in a language that everyone else can understand. Because with Western science, it needs to be written down information so that it's recorded and proved to you can now share that information and help other people understand what the indigenous people always knew. So for example, if my indigenous people always knew that the moose population in my territory was going down due to overhunting and forestation, but they never wrote it down, so the government didn't really listen. Now we're using the two-eyed seeing, which means indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge. We're writing these down, we're taking their notes, where they are, where they're going, what they're eating. And so now we have this proof to show that why this place should be conserved and this is how it should be conserved. Yeah, I just think like it's you know, everyone has their different perspectives and we should all learn about those different kind of perspectives because you guys may not have the same perspective as I do, but I may not have the same perspective as you do. But if we combine them, we can find a happy medium for everybody, right? Yeah, that's what conservation is to me and what it should be.
I think for me, it's reimagining comes or thinking about it is reimagining, right? It's about thinking about who is a conservationist and widening that. So from an African American perspective, for instance, my uncle had a country store for over 40 years. He grew organic vegetables and fruits, and he distributed those in his community. He never used pesticides. It was a way of growing food that my family was very used to. So they always ate organic. They always respected the environment. They worked with the land. And so are they considered conservationists? Are they included in that? I want them to know that their stewardship of the land is also a part of this. And so I think collecting the stories of communities that have worked with nature, telling those stories, uplifting those stories, and not just telling them, having the folks whose story it is to share that with different groups helps to widen who we think about as being a part of this work. And the creativity part of it doesn't have to be art, right? Creativity can be thinking about how can I go into my local community and just be with a local group, see how they do things, ask questions, help to bridge that gap between the scientific community in the Western sense and the folks in communities doing local work. And I think that helps to shift the narrative, as well as projects like the Afrofuturism Collective, and also getting queer ecologies and thinking about how people from the LGBT community consider conservation. And so many different communities of folks can add to this, but I think it just starts with asking the questions of them, having uplifting their stories, and widening how we consider the who.
Right. So echoing what all the panelists have said, I think all of those things are super important. I will also add that I think the narrative around conservation has to change. A lot of times, conservation, it can be seen that we're just anti-development. Some people have said we only care about the birds and the bees and the bush. But showcasing that we're not just protecting everything, like we're not completely anti-development. We just want you to do it correctly, so that it can be good for the long term. I think another thing that we can do to help this, kind of echoing what Binta said, is to showcase conservation working, sharing more of the success stories, especially in this world where there's so much doom and gloom. It can be very uplifting and inspiring to kind of show, okay, this thing, like we've proven it does work. Come and see it. Come to the site where we're doing these things. Watch one of Dolcy's documentaries. Come and see what has been happening on the ground. I think seeing is always believing. And I think another thing that sometimes, and I get this from my friends as well, okay, Shanna, I understand that conservation is important, but what can I do? I think sometimes the public, they want, and they want it laid out, okay? A, B, C. They want to know exactly what they can do. And like Binta or Julian, Dolcy had mentioned that everybody has a role to play. So if you are this person, these are the things that you can do. If you're this person, these are the things that you can do. And making it very clear and actionable so that we can actually have this change that we want to see.
Thank you all for sharing your answers to that question. Our final question kind of connects to some of that hope you were just talking about. But we have kind of a double question. So what gives you the most hope for the future, and what can students and people who are early in their careers do to foster hope in their lives and their work?
I can go first. So for me, it's the youth that gives me hope. So people younger than me. I see more and more younger people. So I'm talking people who are like, 12, 13, 16, whatever, wanting to learn more about the natural world, wanting to learn more about their culture, being engaged. And when I'm talking about sciencey water stuff, they're there listening. They're there trying to understand why, water quality is important, or why you should install culverts a certain way. That way there's no debris going into the water, and that the water can flow through freely. And just like having their engagement is what gives me hope. And what people can do early in their careers to get that hope, because sometimes it can weigh you down when you see all this going around where people are not wanting to fix the environment or whatever, is that you're not just doing this work for yourself. It's not just you against the world or you against the community. It's you. It's a bunch of you guys all fighting for the same thing in your own. So if you guys are going for like birds or like moose, you all have your certain niches, and all these niches, when they add up together, is very important. Like, you're creating a place for other generations to not just survive, but thrive, where people can go swim in the waters freely without being worried about contaminants or having to worry about what they're eating and stuff. Um, so even when it seems like so small, it matters a lot. Just like when the Amik, the beaver, when he builds a dam, he's not worrying about, oh, how big's the dam going to be? Am I going to have enough trees? Am I going to have enough mud? He just takes it a day by a time, one stick and one little mud slap at a time to create something enormous, and not just for himself, for the whole environment. So he creates, environment for the snakes, the reptiles, the birds, the aquatic life. It's just having, taking it one day at a time and just doing your piece. There's a lot of pieces, but it's not just a you against the world. It's a collective, I guess somewhat against the world, but you know what I'm trying to say. We got people on our side doing the same fight in different areas.
I think what gives me hope is very similar to Dolce. You guys, like we had 50 people on this Zoom link, and in a world where these governmental decisions are making absolutely no sense and where environmental degradation seems to be unprecedented, young, aspiring, passionate conservationists like you are really needed more than ever. There's a lot of work to be done, and knowing that what we are doing right now is going to be probably carried on by you guys gives me a lot of hope that what we're doing is just not being done in vain and it's going to be stopped cold. Even with all the changes that are happening now worldwide and in some places. So, how to be hopeful? I think that the world is changing very rapidly. So try to always learn new things, be in continuous learning, because this will make you better adapt to this changing world, and this will make you more useful. Find a project that you find a place for your passion, and when you're passionate about a project, things will start working. And finally, I'll just repeat what I said before. Just celebrate every small win, because as Dolce mentioned, we're going day by day, and while the world might seem to be against you, we're actually making progress, and you can see those things in success stories. So celebrate those small wins and just keep going.
I think what gives me hope is collaboration, seeing interdisciplinary collaborations between scientists and artists, between young folks and elders, seeing that people are coming together in really exciting and new ways. Definitely, as Julian said, everyone here coming to listen to this talk and participate, that gives me hope. And I think imagination is a resource. I've said this a few times, but I really believe and have seen that when we can imagine what's possible, we can move towards that. And I'll also say when there was a time when I was in college when I was feeling really isolated. I was spending most of my time learning how my community had been disenfranchised, had, not been included or been erased from environmental justice and conservation. And so I needed to find evidence of the opposite. I needed to go out into the actual place that I was and find folks working in their communities to do good things. And that's what I did. So I really encourage you to find, as Julian said, find a project, find a group of folks who are close to you, because I think we can kind of get into a digital world where we're seeing all this stuff happening that feels so big, and it is a big thing. But when we come back down to the ground of where we live, one thing we could do, it helps give us hope, whether that's delivering groceries to an elderly person, going to a community garden, finding a local birding group, finding a drawing group, whatever it is that can ground you in the opposite of despair. I think is what I would suggest for staying hopeful.
Okay, so to round out everything, I think what gives me the most hope for the future, I think we're starting to see a slight, but I think we're starting to see a shift and a recognition about the need for conservation, that it is working and that more resources need to be put towards it. Whether it is financed fully is another thing, but I think there is that recognition that is starting to happen. I think another thing that gives me hope is that this upcoming generation, are they Gen X? Is that what they are? I don't know what generation or Generation Alpha, whichever one is the one that's coming up right now. They are very aware of the fact about what's going on with the planet. Like they're very aware that this is the situation. I think my generation was like, it's going to happen if we don't do anything. I think now this generation is like, this is happening and we have to do something to be able to adapt and stop it from happening. So I think it's good that there's that understanding and knowledge. So, you know, most of those, they know about climate change, they know about the crises that are happening, which is good. And I think what students and people early in their career can do to foster hope, again, like the panelists have mentioned, finding your community. There must be somebody else within, maybe not in your friend circle, but in your institution that is also like-minded and wants to go birding on a weekend. I'm sorry that all my examples are related. I think there's also an opportunity to get involved. So guaranteed there's some sort of group that is doing something environmental, even if you know it involves pestering the people like, hey, I'm actually really, really interested and I want to get this thing done. I want to help. These are the skills I can bring. Make sure you get involved. And even for you, that will help get some skills under your belt and you can put on your resume so that if you do want to enter the field, you have a kind of running start. And you can also realize which area, like I mentioned, which niche you really appreciate. I think another thing that students in this generation coming up is that they're very, and the people always say brazen, but they're very straight to the point. Like they will call you out on something if they think that you're not doing enough. So holding the government, the decision makers, etc., accountable. Like you said, you were going to do these things, and you're not doing them. And I'm going to blast you on social media. Like they don't play about that kind of thing, which I think is really good because you do need somebody to hold countries, decision makers, etc., accountable to the things that they said they were going to do. And again, there's more people who are interested in conservation in the environmental field in general. I keep telling them, you know, environment is the next step. Like that's gonna be the new sexy career that everybody's gonna want to get into because of the situation we're in now. So it's so good to see so many people interested. And reach out to us for any other support that you might need so that we can help you and guide you along.
All right, thank you so much, both Emily and Esmeralda, for running this question period, and to our panelists for an excellent discussion. I know I learned a lot, and I got my juices flowing for all the things that the projects I want to do and the stories I want to start writing. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise. I'll pull back up the slideshow just for next steps so that people know ways that they can continue to stay engaged. All right, so again, this is the conclusion, which is hard to believe that it's already coming to an end of our second session of Biodiversity of Wonder. We will be following up with all of you who've registered with a follow-up survey to get your feedback. I'll also follow up with the panelists to get, you mentioned so many amazing resources, so I would love to, I'll reach out to you to collect all of that information so that if people didn't have the time to write it down when you said it, that they can look into some of those things that you mentioned. So stay tuned to your inboxes. We have a website, a page for the future leaders in conservation, in addition to more information about Road to Recovery. So there are 2 QR codes there. One goes to the Spanish version of the website and the other goes to the English version of the website. We have an announcement list specifically for the future leaders in conservation, but also generally to Road to Recovery more broadly. And you can contact us at our Gmail there on the screen to get more involved with our initiative or to join our announcement list. Finally, I'm really excited that this is the official launch for our community Discord. So this QR code on the far end here will take you to our Discord, which is a platform to have conversations. We have lots of channels, some places to get advice, to ask your questions, to share funny bird moments. You can share some memes if you want to just connect with people. Maybe there's people who are on this call who are in your area, so we can bring some of this work to that community level that all the panelists brought up so clearly. So I encourage you to join our community Discord, and hopefully it'll be a good gathering place for us all after the close of this session. And finally, I would like to extend another immense amount of gratitude to all of our panelists. Your different expertise and your backgrounds and contributions to this panel complemented each other so well, and I really appreciated hearing from all of your different perspectives. I'd also like to thank our translator, Bernardo, who is on the call for making this event in both English and in Spanish, so thank you so much. I'd also like to thank our planning team again. This was truly a group effort to get this session running. And I'd also like to thank you, all the participants, for showing up today. This recording will be available in English and Spanish on our website. So if your friends didn't have time to join the call, they can review it later. So thank you all so much. And that concludes the session today. Yeah, thank you all so much again. That was phenomenal. It was such an interesting conversation.
Thank you everyone for organizing this. This is like a mammoth piece of work that you pulled out. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I learned so much from the other panelists. Thank you so much.
Yeah, miigwech for having us and inviting us. We learned a lot. Like I said, I had my little fire go out this week, but then I got restarted doing this, so much needed.
Yes, thank you so much. Really appreciated being here.
Great, thank you. And I'll reach back out via email to gather some of that information from you, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks
All right.
everyone.
Have a nice one. Bye-bye.